And later on it came out that he was caught for this and that scandal. And I became dismayed. And what I realized in the course of preparing this talk was that I myself have been affected. How? I stopped wanting to practice that much. I was learning Islamic things myself, studying Sharia, answering questions, fatwas and fiqh questions day after day, but I didn't even want to pray 2 extra rakahs. Why? Because something inside me was feeling like, if the religion is like so lofty and perfect, and the vast majority of the community is very good, why do we have a few people that go astray? And why is it that the more religious, the more learned, the weirder and weirder these things seem to get? Am I right or wrong? You don't hear about this stuff necessarily always in normal people. I heard something of a saying, and that saying was this, and I'm not saying this solves everything, but they said, do not be amazed by the one who goes astray, but be amazed by the one who holds fast to the way. That's my own translation. But we often look at the bad apples and we get dismayed. We don't look how this deen has uplifted millions and billions of people from the worst types of behavior to the best examples of humankind. And so I realized that while these incidents rock our community, they rock our community because of where we stand, our principles. Just like when you have we know the hadith about the body, the ummah is like a body. If one part of it is injured or hurt, the other part stays up in fever. And this is exactly the reactions that we're having. When you have an infection in one part, as Dr. can tell us better than I can, when you sometimes have an infection, the whole body has a response. You can have an immune response. And you have a fever, your fever is fighting something off. And so these feelings and emotions that our hearts are going through, this turbulence, is because it's a healthy response to everything that we're going through. One of the things that we look at, we wonder, how can this happen to us? Is we have to go right back to our origin. And we have to understand, and Shaykh Uthman will speak, I think, more about the role of shaitan in this whole situation. But we have to realize that shaitan has promised to lead as many of us astray as he can. That's what shaitan is in our tradition, a whisper, not like a demon with a pitchfork. It's a whisper. And he has promised to lead as many as he can to hell, and we think that shaitan only comes to the people of the simple understanding, the crass sins. We don't realize that shaitan was able to trick a prophet out of paradise. And so what about us people who are not perfect, human beings? There are people, they say that the shaitan, the higher you get in your game with Allah, the higher you get in your learning, the worse, the harder the shaitan comes after you. He's been in existence since before our entire human race. And he knows how to lead people astray, judging by the weaknesses in their hearts. And we all have things in our hearts. So when we realize that, as they say, that the taller a tree grows, the harder it falls, the more noise it makes, and this is true. When you have someone of learning and stature, and they betray a trust, and they completely break the amana, the responsibility of what they have been given, and worse yet, they do their sins while Quran and Hadith and beautiful things are on their lips. People are trusting them. Then this is because it's shaitan's trick. That person gets to a stage where they think, I'm safe, I'm okay. We know about the saying, we know about the story in our tradition where there was a monk from among the previous ummahs, one of the kind of ascetic worshippers, and there was 2 brothers, and they said, we're going on a journey and we're leaving, can we leave our sister in your care? We're going on a journey, we don't trust anybody else. And this is our young sister, a virgin young sister. And can we just ask you every day to put some food out for her, make sure she's fed? And so he agreed. And what happened? The shaitan came into him, and it went from leaving food to a little bit of talking, to a little bit of visiting. It turned into an affair, it turned into a sin. That sin turned into a pregnancy. That became a shame, a scandal. In order to end it, he ended up murdering that girl and burying her. And subhanAllah, everything came out. You perhaps have heard of this narration, this story. And so this idea has been there, that the shaitan, he takes certain people when they are very prominent. May Allah protect everyone. Takes people when they think that they have done so much, and then uses that, because at the end of the day, the humility always has to be there. Whenever we say Alhamdulillah for some learning or some benefit, you have to mean it. If you memorize Quran, or you became a big shaykh, or you have influence over people, you have to really see that that is from Allah. Because if you see that it's from Allah and not from yourself, you will always return back to Allah in your faults. And so when you realize as well that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, subhanAllah, some people, He does not lead them astray in a fast way. Allah guides and Allah also leads astray. And some people, there's an istidraj because of the wrongs that they do. Istidraj means a gradual dissension into wrong actions. When you do one thing wrong, and you say, oh, that's okay, no problem, no one saw it. And rather than say astaghfirullah and clear it out, you accept it. And then you do another thing wrong, another thing wrong, the entire time deceived by your learning. People think I'm so pious. People think I'm a beautiful, speaker or reciter. People, look how many followers I have. And so if I do this little bit of wrong, it's okay. And the ego, the nafs, comes to tell you, and the shaitan comes to tell you that if you did this, look how many other things you've done good. So surely in the balance of things. But what happens? You start to take Allah for granted. You start to take the Quran for granted, the hadith for granted, your learning, your title, your followers. You all take it for granted and think it's yours. And that's why the compromises that people make, eventually they don't realize they're getting lower and lower and lower. And then the other question comes then, why does this fall happen? As the Prophet said, he said, Inna Allah tayyibun la yaqbalu illa tayyib. That Allah is pure. Allah doesn't accept other than what is pure. Allah is pure, and if there are things that we bring forth in the name of religion, in the name of spirituality, in the name of goodness, that have flaws inside it or a crooked intention, Allah will reject that and take that away. And the reality is that this is from what they call the ghira, al-ghira al-ilahiyya. Allah's, ghira is like jealousy, like protective jealousy. Allah has ghira over His deen. Allah has ghira over His deen. So whenever someone starts to misuse it, Allah will cast them out of service of His deen. So we think that our finding out about this, it's like, why did I have to find out? No, this was exactly the person who's doing wrong about us in a scandal. Allah brought them out to show that His deen is not this, to show that this is not acceptable, to show that you cannot use the Quran and the Sunnah to do wrong things. Allah is very jealous over His deen and He protects it. So that's why the people who are doing wrong, it's actually a ni'mah for all of us that it gets exposed and stopped. Meanwhile, there are other religious groups, and the abuse continues generationally. But alhamdulillah for one thing. Number one is that we as Muslims, we do not have a central authority. We're not like the Catholic Church, where there's no head of Muslims. That was the Prophet ﷺ. No one else can claim that they are spiritually the inheritor of the entire ummah. And what does that mean? That means there's no infallible person there who, is the sound gone or sound? Yeah. Oh, they just took the echo out. Yeah, a little bit of thunder in that. The point is that we don't have any sort of covering up in our deen. If someone's doing wrong, we can look and say, this is wrong. We have nothing to cover up. Why? Because when you do those wrong things, we're not embarrassed. It's bad, it's embarrassing, but it doesn't reflect on the entire religion because we are not centrally controlled. We're not claiming that people are infallible. We don't have a leader who's saying, I'm guided by God and therefore everything you're doing is okay. Alhamdulillah for that. Maybe that's one of the wisdoms of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decentralized our deen. after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what does it come down to? Individual responsibility. Each person here is responsible on their own. No one will answer for anyone else except their own actions. And this is why when we see that ghira, we have to take that as a sign. We have to take that as a sign. When our iman gets hit, and we say, oh, how can this be happening? Because I was so happy being Muslim, and now look, this person abused someone else. You have to remember that our taking it out on Allah is also from the shaitan. It's also from the shaitan. It's a test, actually. We know one thing, that when we see the reason why evil things happen in this world, first of all, the victims we know, we are with them 100% in every situation. We make dua for them. We grieve for them. We will help them and support them in every way. And if there has ever been silence in our communities over these things, that has to stop now. And that, the victims we believe will be recompensed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that only Allah can recompense someone. And we know that the person who does wrong will be taken to account. But what is our job? If we sit and we begin to lose hope, if we begin to get dismayed, if we begin to say that, oh, and take it out back on the deen, actually the shaitan has not just tricked the zalim, the abuser, he's also tricked us as well. Because the shaitan can, it's easy. Shaitan can show the abuser how they do wrong, show us how the abuser did wrong. But one thing is we rarely think about, am I taking this out on Allah? When we know the hadith, the beautiful hadith, that subhanAllah, if you go back to the most foundational hadith, sometimes they're in the Arba'in, you realize that the trajectory of a human being is, the Prophet ﷺ already told us that there are some people, and this is the beautiful hadith when that you now realize why that's there. He said, "Inna ahadakum la ya'malu bi'amali ahli al-jannah hatta ma yakunu baynahu wa baynaha illa dhira' thumma yasbiqu alayhi al-kitab fayukhtamu lahu bi'amali ahli an-nar fayadkhuluha." The Prophet ﷺ said that indeed one of you could be doing the deeds of the people of paradise until you do it your whole life, until there's nothing but a handspan between you and entering paradise. Just die and you'll get into Jannah because you've done so much good. But then your destiny overtakes you. Meaning the things that Allah knew was in your heart. Nobody knew. Maybe you didn't even know. Meaning an abuser. And that destiny overtakes that person, and they start doing the actions of the people of Jahannam. And they go inside the hellfire. And there's a flip side too to that. There are some people who do wrong things their entire life until it's as though there's just a handspan between them and hellfire. Then their destiny overtakes them. And this is where we have to understand, does this reflect on Allah? No, this is on the individual. This is not on the community or Islam. In fact, our beloved Prophet ﷺ, he quotes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'll close with this, that Allah says, Ya ibadi, O my servants, even if the first of you to the last of you, and the humans of you, and the jinn of you, even if you were on the heart of the most God-fearing, pious person among you, if everybody had the most pious heart, it would not increase in Allah's dominion, my dominion, one little bit. And then he said, "O my servants." When he says, "O my servants," it's an endearing way. Even if the first of you, to the last of you, and the jinn of all, and all the jinn, and the humans of you, and the jinn of you, even if you all had the worst heart, the most sinful heart of a person in every single person, it would not take away from my dominion, my glory, my majesty, one little bit. And so Allah is saying that this deen is beyond being touched by the actions of a few people who abuse. And so we also have to remember, times like this are the mazahir of Tawheed. What do I mean by that? I mean they are the times where we look and we say, truly in this deen, there's no one except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we rely on. My iman and your iman is not tied back to any shaykh, any scholar, any imam, any counselor. And if our hearts became attached to them, because hearts naturally attach to people, Allah created our hearts to attach to people that do good, right? What is it? جُبِّلَتِ الْقُلُوبِ لَحُبِّ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ إِلَيْهَا. That the hearts are predisposed to love anyone who does good for them. So if someone taught you, if someone did good, but that's where, when they go astray, that's where we say we still go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we never made them. They were the asbab. They were the means. They were the means for us reaching Allah. Did we confuse them with the goal? Since when did my shaykh or someone else, a scholar or an imam or a personality, since when did they become my destination. Allah is my destination. So with that, I just wanted to open this and remember that just like how the Prophet ﷺ said, Medina is like a furnace. It kicks out anyone who's not worthy of it. This deen, the Quran, they kick out anyone who's not worthy of teaching it. And this is a way how Allah renews and cleanses. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq to understand the spiritual lessons in all of this and attach to Him more than anything else, inshallah, and realize why people go astray. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save all of us and protect our communities, inshallah. Wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for opening and kind of setting that tone of framing our deen, alhamdulillah, that it is beyond being touched by incidents like this, that our connection is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is where our centralized authority lies, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll segue right now with Dr. Uthman Umarji, who is a faculty at UCI and a director of survey and research at Yaqeen Institute. And I believe you'll be talking a little bit about how and why maybe scholars fail us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. My dear brothers and sisters, we're here. I mean, no need to beat around the bush. So, we heard some of the most troubling news probably we've heard in our lives in this last week. Story of allegation of betrayal that is more heinous than probably anything else we have heard. And so, while we're not here to speak about the particular incident, it's not necessary, the phenomena of scandal, the phenomena of abuse is something well known. It is irrefutable that occurs in our communities. It is something that happens way too often. And I just want to begin by saying that it is absolutely, like, just being blunt, I remember last week when the information hit me, it's like, wasn't able to sleep that night. And then, you get a headache, right? And you have psychosomatic pain, and you have anger, and you have frustration, you want to punch a wall, you want to choke someone. I mean, these are real things that people are feeling, especially if you've experienced this, if a friend is experiencing these things. And I, someone who does the research at Yaqeen, just to put some of this in context, right? I did a survey of Muslims. It was about 700 of them, and about 22.5% had experienced sexual abuse in particular before the age of 18. So this is something which is unfortunately just far more occurring than it ever should happen in a society, in a community, especially that of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I just want to begin with that it is absolutely expected, it is normal. If you don't have these type of emotions, there's probably something that might not be right within someone. If they don't feel these natural things of really serious anger, pain, frustration, trauma, fill in the blank, there's feelings that I can't even express. All that being said, I think the most fundamental reaction that I had as someone who has studied this deen for a long time and spends a lot of my time in the presence of people of knowledge is, how does this happen? How does somebody get involved somehow, some way, in situations that lead to some of the worst crimes that a human can commit? And this is where I want to kind of start, where Sheikh Abdullah had spoken this, had kind of warmed this up. Was that oftentimes we think that if only there was a better protocol in place, that somehow this wouldn't have happened. No, there'll be no more bad things happening in the world if there's a better system in place. And the truth of the matter is that the human being is always trying to get around the systems in place that are trying to keep him out of trouble. If you're a kid at school and there's a rule about not cheating and that, you find a way to see, how can I get homework assignment done, a test answer. It's normal human behavior to try and get around the system. And in this case, what I wanted to highlight again is the fact of the matter is that it's shaitan first and foremost that we need to keep in front of our eyes as the source of a lot of our corruption, our deviation. And as Sheikh said very beautifully, no human being is immune to this. And I really want to begin with this because sadly, I have come to see myself in my own 20 years of being in this work, is that people have a tendency to believe that the people of deen, the people who are supposedly teaching me my religion, are immune to the shahawat and the desires that regular people are. Where, yes, a normal man and a normal woman should not be in a room in private. But the sheikh is the sheikh. He doesn't have those type of feelings. And I just want us to recognize that first and foremost, that this is absolutely a travesty to feel this way, to believe this, and it is a fitna to everybody. And this is why we have the stories that were mentioned, right? Whether it was Barsisa, or this is actually why we have rules in Islam. And so the way I wanted to kind of start this is there's two different ways these things happen that I want to be very clear about. Shaitan is the key to both of them. The first one is that the shaitan recognizes that if he leads a random person astray, he's led a random person astray. But if he focuses his efforts on those who have the hearts of the people in their hands, and I can break this person, I can break a community. And the famous hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ here is very timely, where the shaitan, who has his arsh over the water, he goes to his other shayateen and he asks them, what did you do today? And the shaitan will go and say that, you know what, I did this, I made this person lie, I made this person cheat, I made this person do this. And the shaitan's like, yeah, that's nice. Like, I want more. Until somebody says that I was able to separate between a man and his wife. And now the shaitan's like, you actually did something. Right? Now I'm going to acknowledge that you have been successful as a devil. And so the shaitan's goal is to not just misguide a person, it is to break families, and more so to break communities. This is where the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is really powerful, because people often, this is not an issue of knowing halal and haram. Everyone knows what is right and what is wrong and these common sense things. So the Prophet asked his companions one time a question. He says, what do you say about adultery? Common sense answer, right? What do you say about adultery? They said that Allah and His Messenger have forbade it, so none of us should get near it. But that's not what he wanted. He wasn't like, okay, good answer, let's move on. He said that if a man commits adultery with 10 people, it's not as severe than if he did it with his neighbor. Why? Because when scandal happens close to home, when it happens in a neighborhood, happens in a block, it happens in a community, it tears at the fabric of society. That's just a regular man in his neighborhood, let alone the person who is representing the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. So how much more heinous is that? How much more repulsive and disgusting is it? And thus it is something that we must just front and center say that this is something that shaitan is trying to do, and he is committed to doing this. And there are, again, two types of people. Those who become like shaitan. People don't get this sometimes. We think shaitan in the abstract. The Quran says that there are shayateen min al-jinni wal-ins. There are shaitans that are from the jinn and shaitans that are from the human beings. There are people literally, and there's entire in books of Islam, they say people who seek the dunya by the deen. So this is actually not like a flaw in the system. This is by design. Someone says, look, people trust people of religion. People trust people who claim they represent God. They let their guard down in those circumstances. Let me enter into this space because this is the easiest space to exploit somebody. Because you're not going to assume that that person is up to anything. So this is the group that they are demonic themselves. And they exist. This is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us in that hadith that many of us heard these last few days that the first 3 people to be called to account on the Day of Judgment are who? Righteous people, publicly righteous people. The guy who teaches Quran, the person who fights and dies for the sake of Allah, and the person who gives money for the wealth of Allah. Why? The Prophet is telling us, look, don't think that people who do things outwardly good, you can automatically assume that they're people of Iman and Taqwa. This person will be in hell, and this person in hell, and this person in hell. Why? They did it for ulterior reasons. They used the deen to get status. They used the deen to get access. And so we just want to put that to the side for a moment, and I will, in my opinion, this is not the norm. This is the exception of society. That you have the demonic, satanic individuals who use deen to access people and to commit acts of abuse. The other side is the much more commonly one that occurs. And again, I've been in this community for 20 years of my adult life, and I've dealt with numerous cases myself, being called into meetings of where scholars are consulting about the case of other people of deen who have done things that are inappropriate. And what you find in most of these circumstances is a second way that shaitan gets to people, which is that he slowly eats at their values in little ways that are unsuspecting. I'll give you an example. What do people of knowledge do typically? They get up and they say good things about Islam. If you've ever heard a sheikh give a khutbah on marriage, most of the time, hopefully, you'll walk away saying, you know what, man, he knows how to treat a man. He's telling the wives to treat the man with respect. He's telling the men to treat their wives with respect. And that person now is being now almost having people come up to him or her and say, please help me in my marriage. Please help me in my life circumstances. And the shaitan says, help so-and-so, help so-and-so. She's in trouble, he's in trouble. Well, she can't tell her husband that she's talking to the imam. She can't tell, this is the secrecy comes in. But it's okay, it's for the greater good. And so we let our guard down because we assume they're people that don't have these emotions, and one thing leads to another, and one day the haram happens, and you say, what happened? And you say, you were not aware of shaitan step by step by step, failure upon failure, institutionally, the individual, right, the scholar, whatever it may be. Why am I putting all this here before I close? The last few minutes I want to get at is we must never let our guard down. This is what our deen taught us. The deen did not say if someone knows Quran, then khalwa is no longer a rule. If someone is a faqih, then it's okay, right, that you have intimate conversations with that person. It doesn't matter who that person is with you or your child. In any circumstance, there are rules. And by the way, books of fiqh, I was talking to Shaykh Abdullah about this. I used to read this, by the way. I remember in my studies in Egypt, it was really strange for me. Long chapters on why scholars should not sit alone with young boys they're teaching. Because they're saying that the human nature, right, is that these things will happen if we're not careful. So even with, this is not a male to female thing. This is a male to male thing or a female to female thing. Is that in every circumstance, put up those barriers. So what do we do as communities? We say, look, we are going to make sure that no matter, I don't assume everybody's a shaitan, and I don't assume everyone is an angel. So I treat everybody with the way the Sharia expects me to treat them, which is I keep boundaries between myself and them in communication. It's always being done in a healthy fashion. If I need to contact the sheikh, how do I contact the sheikh? Is there a mechanism by which the masjid asks me to contact the sheikh? If my kid is studying with the sheikh, in what setting is he in there with the sheikh? If there's 5 kids in a room and 4 kids leave, is the sheikh allowed to be alone with that student, or is there a mechanism? Ask these questions and say, you know what, I know this is not intended. Like, it's a slippery slope is my point I'm making. 5 people in a room with a teacher, 4 kids walk out, and now the sheikh is left with one student. The sheikh didn't do anything wrong here. But you don't want to ever lead a circumstance to occur where the thought of wrong can enter and suspicion can develop, because this is what tears at our communities. And I want to close with one thing. This is the last point, is that I don't think a panel like this can solve the pain that people are feeling. It cannot solve the immense trauma that many people are having. And I highly encourage people that if you or someone you love has been hurt in any way, to please seek professional support. Right? Because this is not like knowledge and in 30 minutes this gets resolved. This requires a lot of opening up to the right person and being able to work through things that are deeply seated over many, many years. But I will say that doesn't mean, right, that we don't have the masjid. This cannot be then outsourced, right, to the therapist. This has to be a conversation that comes up over and over again in the masjid, right, in the halaqat, right, on the minbar. And make sure your masjid does this. And I said I'd close, but the last point I want to make is to just know that the scholars in your community take this issue very seriously, not from this last week. Actually, for the last 10, 20 years, we've sat in multiple of these occasions where someone did something wrong, and 10 imams and scholars from the community come together and say, this person is not morally fit to serve the community. And I will tell you one thing, which is you have to hold your communities accountable. We find sometimes a barrier is the people in leadership of the institutions. Because there's a fear about what are we going to do with a scandal on our hands now? How do we then tell the people that the person of knowledge actually was not as moral as we, and it's difficult because the last people who want to protect a predator is people of deen, because that just erodes the trust in the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal and in their own profession. So imams and scholars of all backgrounds are not in the business of trying to defend, deflect, and to sweep under the rug these allegations, because we know, just like whether it's a Catholic church or anything else, this can only lead to shar, only can lead to evil. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that moral courage to speak up when we feel that something is not right. And you should be able to go up to the imam or to the board or anyone else and say, you know what, nothing has happened per se, but I'm not getting the right feeling from this setting that we're in. Something needs to change because I don't feel comfortable in this space. The way he said something, the way she said something, my kid was in this circumstance. Like, have a voice. And it usually happens. People will say, you know what, I gave an excuse, I gave an excuse, I gave an There's a difference between accusing someone and then saying, you know what, I just feel like we need to be a little bit more halal in how we do things here. And don't mix those two up. Don't let someone shame you into saying, well, you can't accuse him without super amount of evidence. You're not accusing anybody of anything. You're just saying this is not following the guidelines of Islam. We need to become tighter. We need to be more in line with the Sharia. We need to be doing that which is pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us, to protect our children, to heal our grieving hearts, to bring peace to those who have been afflicted, to bring justice in every way against the oppressors. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gather us in the highest gardens of paradise with the prophets and the martyrs and the righteous. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair. Ameen, ameen, ameen to all of that. And I think huge take home there is just it's the concept that we are responsible, like each and every single one of us here, in being vigilant in our communities and not shutting out our intuition or gut feeling, because oftentimes we know, and creating an environment and a culture and a society and a community where even if the children are coming back and they may be having conversations, oftentimes it's, people, again, it's you want to do the excuse, you don't want to make an accusation, but there's a fine line, being, listening to them, listening to your gut feeling of something may be off. There's a respectful way to address it with leadership, and I think the message that we've been getting here, alhamdulillah, in this community specifically, even just being able to have this panel discussion so promptly and so timely with everything that's going on, it gives that message that, it's going to be addressed and it will be handled, inshallah, in a way that is respectful, mindful, and ensures everyone's safety. Okay. And then I know I had mentioned questions, and I said if you have them, you can go ahead, and there was a QR code, but there's a slight change. We'll be having note cards, so if you need a pen as well, you can either borrow it from someone next to you, or there are pens that will be available as well, brothers. Oh, okay, so there's pens and note cards that are by the two pillars right behind you. So if you have any questions, feel free to go and grab a note card and a pen as well. And then we'll get to that, inshallah. So jazakumullah khair so far, and of course it just keeps, we keep moving with it. And so we have right now Sheikha Dr. Hayfat Yunus, who is the founder of Jannah Institute, who will be enlightening us, inshallah, with some lessons from our seerah.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. This actually, I landed on Monday, and the first thing I see a message from our outreach coordinator. Did you know? And I'm sure all of you, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but again, we're not talking about an incident, but we need to cover something called phenomena. So it's a huge difference. So basically, and then we had a discussion on the Yaqeen Forum, and then we had a discussion, we have a female scholar group, more than 300 scholars, female from all over the world. One thing I can tell you, which is absolutely expected and should be, the emotions is extremely high. Painful, absolutely, disappointing, you name it, is there. Especially it is not the first one that comes as public. The first question I asked myself when I read it, and this is, I'm sharing with everybody, when I read it, when we had this discussion, and this is how we all should be. When we hear things, we are three kinds of human beings. Either I'm a regular person, meaning I don't have a lot of information, I'm not a scholar, I'm a person who comes to the masjid, or I'm a person interested in deen, or I'm a person part of the Muslim community. So regular person. Then you're a student of knowledge, which you could be a student of this person or that person. And the third, which is the most important, I am a person who have authority, or I am a masjid, or I am an institute. So you have to look at this and don't take the responsibility of the others because you don't have it. And Allah is not asking you to do it. Are you all with me? So number one is, I heard it. First question I'll ask myself, and this is actually what I asked myself, what does Allah want from me to do? He made it public. Everyone is talking about it. The media, the social media is full of it. You need to say the following: what pleases Allah? Don't look at people. Don't let your emotion. Even at one point, I had to say, let's just take a breath. It's very painful, but just take a breath. So anytime you hear any of this, don't brush it, don't hide it. Just something we have a lot in our Muslim community. Don't hide it, but also don't just keep talking about it. Is what you are saying pleasing to Allah? Is that what He wants from me? So that's the first thing each one of us have to think, what does Allah want from me? Number one, I have to please Him even in this condition. Second, which the Honorable Shuyukh, they covered it, this is not new. Not to that extent. But it happened. The Rasul ﷺ was with them. Not you and me. He was with them. And you all know the story of Sayyidah Aisha. I'm not going to talk about the details, I'm going to talk about the fact that something happened in a Muslim community surrounded by Rasul ﷺ in Medina, not even in Mecca. And Sahaba were involved in this, in spreading the rumors. Second, happened in Medina also when there was zina, there was illegal or again, private, intimate relationship. And the man came and confessed. Rasul ﷺ didn't cover it. Didn't say, you know what, this is going to create a huge fitna in the community and this and that. No. But he kept asking him. I mean, this is a beautiful story. You all have to know about it. It's called Al-Ma'iz wal-Ghamidiyya. He was a young boy. And he came and confessed. And again, I'm not going to go into the detail, but you can go and read about it. He kept asking him, you're sure, you're sure, you're sure. And with details, questions. And he said yes. He did not stop from applying the law. And this is a Sahabi, this is a companion. What is going to happen to Medina? What is going to happen to the community? But the law of Allah has to be applied. And you have to protect the other people. Third is nothing to do with this, but it's also an incidence of a public disobedience to Allah, is the three people who stayed in Medina and did not leave and went with the Rasul ﷺ. Public disobedience to Allah. Not to that extent we are talking about, but it's a major disobedience to Allah in the sight of Allah. And Allah talked about it in the Quran and stayed away from them for about 40 days. So what do I learn about this? When I hear this, as painful as it is, I say this can happen. I don't want to deny it. Denial will never change. Meaning, we're going to hear it again and again and again. I'm going to say, this happened, Ya Allah, protect us. Ya Allah, protect me, protect my child, protect me from being that person. So that's number one. Number two, I'm going to say to myself, this happened. If that person is a teacher, and I'm saying this to everybody who's hearing me, I think we have a good number of people online. That person needs to stop, even if we are not 100% sure that this could be, maybe a possibility is not right. Allah knows, but that person needs to stop teaching. And this also happened. You remove them, that's the time shows. If they came back as innocent, proven innocence, you reinstate them back. But meanwhile, they need to be away. One thing, if the child or the woman or the man, follow your gut feeling. Follow your gut feeling. If you see signs, don't brush it. And I'm begging everybody in this room and who's hearing me, don't put scholars on pedestals. And I'm saying about myself, people pull my hand to kiss it, and I said, A'udhu billah. You know what are you doing to my heart? You're ruining it. Don't put them, especially young people, don't put them up there. Nobody is up there except the Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam. Even Sahaba I just shared with you. So here you are. Once you see signs, go, don't talk to your friends, rather go and talk to the people of authority. then in front of Allah you deliver the message. And if you are that person involved in this with a teacher, a she or a he, you need to stop right away. Don't brush it. The most important thing now, which I think that's, Allah allows things to happen, there's always a reason for that, is we need, again, as just mentioned, is we need to check everybody. When I apply for a hospital job, they do background checkup on me. Absolutely. Lawyers, everybody, teachers. This needs to be applied in masajid, right? And we, as imams or teachers, we shouldn't get offended. Because I don't get offended when I'm in a hospital and they do background check on me. I don't. You know why? I'm not worried about anything. Alhamdulillah. So that's the first prevention. Second, and this is to all the board of masajid or whoever is running masajid, take it seriously. This is becoming a absolutely, unfortunately, repeated phenomena. I mean, we hear about things, but there is others that people even don't know about it. Nobody talks about it and it goes under the rug. You can't do that. People are hurt. You know what this trauma can cause to a child or a woman or to a man? Lifelong. You take care of it, Talk to the community that this is exactly what we are doing. In fact, actually, the first one is, Sheikh Omar came to me and said, do you think we should talk about it? Remember? And I said, absolutely. And I'm like you, Sheikh Abdullah, I'm surprised that this is it. And then when we talk about other programs, this masjid, this is the reason we did it here. Otherwise, I'd have told you, we'll do it in ICOI. That tells me the community still don't believe this can happen. Or they don't want to talk about it. Then we will not change. Then we will not change. Whether we raised back home, whether we are here, this happens. Prevention. Masajid has to take it very seriously. Something called zero tolerance. I remember one time in one of the masajids, somebody came in outside the masjid with a gun, was fired on the spot, was one of the board members. On the spot, they fired. Why? You don't wait till someone kills someone and then take actions. So we need, all masajid needs to take it. 3, and this is very important. If that person is proven, he or she, young or old, proven what they have done is proven, they should not be back and to teaching and preaching. Because that will give a subtle message that it's okay. Time will heal. We cannot do that. We can't do that. Because the result of it is 2 things. We lose the trust in our masajid and in our teachers, and we don't want that. Because the norm is not that. There's a lot of good people out there, right? And the other thing is, if there is predators, then they will keep doing it. No problem, you know what? The community will forget and will come back. We cannot do that. Take it seriously, at this time for everybody. I said this to myself. A lot of dua, a lot of istighfar, a lot of istighfar. Ask Allah to forgive us. We as a Muslim community, as if Gaza and what is happening in Gaza and Lebanon is not enough. And then we get hit with again and again and again. Ask Allah for forgiveness. May Allah forgive us. May Allah make us people worthy even of this beautiful masajid. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us act correctly at time of fitna. Because this is time of fitna. And when Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam predicted that there is going to be a time where there will be a lot of tests and trials, what did he say to the Sahabi? First thing he said, hold your tongue. أمسك عليك لسانك والزم بيتك وابكي على خطيئتك. Meaning, don't talk just for the sake of talk. Address the issue, but just don't talk. Number 2 is, think of your sins. As you said, nobody is immune. And number 3, as much as you can focus on Allah, your relationship with Allah. May Allah protect us all, Ya Rabbi, Ameen. Can't tell you how painful is this. But we had to, again, talk about it, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure us all, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this pass with the best way. May Allah heal everybody who is hearing us and seeing us, who have been through this painful experience. Ya Rabbi Ameen. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه تسليما كثيرا.
Jazakillah khair. Thank you. We have a couple of questions. And so we're going to get through, inshallah, as many as we can. And then I'm taking the liberty of anything that we're not able to address that we can still address after Aisha. I just took that liberty. Okay. Because I think this is very important, and just you being here, each of these questions deserves to be shared and brought to light. For one of them, I know this is a common question that we've even seen from before, but it's for the children, right? So maybe there's some children who, and this is going to be a little bit in the specific case, but one of them says for our kids using who have maybe used the online video or we're still using it for tajweed, what can be shared with them, because they're likely hearing things through the grapevine. So that's one piece of discussing things with our children. The other one is, how do we strike a balance between them trusting their imams and religious leaders while still becoming alarmed enough at the sign of any misconduct? So maybe one of them is more on how do we talk to our kids right now who may be hearing things through the grapevine, and then part two is empowering them to be able to be vigilant as well if they hear or experience anything.
Okay, Bismillah. I'll just say a few words on that, and then if any of the esteemed shuyukh want to add to that. The first thing I would say is, this is why we must teach our kids about the sacred law, our Sharia. Because when we teach them that people are imperfect, and we teach them that there are guidelines, once you uphold the law, you don't actually have to go around being suspicious of everybody, because you know that there's a standard of interaction that you are not going to go below. So I don't need to worry, for example, if my wallet is in my pocket, I don't need to worry, is someone going to steal it? If I leave it out at the shoes and I leave it over there, then I'm worried about it. In the same way with our children, we teach them, rather than teach them that as one incident is going to be something that's, every teacher is suspect. No, you don't say that. You say, look, you trust and you love and respect your teachers and everyone else, but there are some red lines. If they ever want to be alone with you, if they ever touch you in a certain place, if they ever say certain things or show you certain things. And we have to make sure the education in our communities is very strong, so that way that there's a preventative that's there. And when it's known that this community has an education and the children are educated and the parents are educated about this, then even perpetrators will feel hesitant to use that community as a place to exploit the people there, right? The shaitan only gets the dhi'b al-qasi, the one the sheep that strays from the flock. The wolf tries to take that sheep. So the shaitan is like that too. They make abusers look at vulnerable people. So I think to answer that question, I would say we have to teach our children about what's going on and teach them the rules, but don't teach them to fear everything and everyone. And this doesn't only go for teachers. As a counselor, if you ask me, I would be uncomfortable even with my kids with their uncles and aunts. I mean, if you're in counseling, you realize that the evil is everywhere. I mean, to be honest, even with your parents, you tell your kids, listen, even mommy and daddy are never going to ever do this. They're never going to ask you to do this. So when you apply these laws of Sharia, they apply to everyone. And that way you can have that person interact, and they also know the healthy boundaries, and you don't have to suspect.
I want to add a few things that sometimes I think we assume that children, if you inform them that they have the cognitive faculties to enact the rules you're telling them. And again, my own expertise in child development, I will say this is actually not the case. If you tell a child, which you have to tell them anyway, you absolutely need to tell them, but that's not enough. Because it's very hard for a child to say, well, you know what, my mom and dad told me X, Y, and Z, but this person I've come to like, I've come to trust, I've come to respect, And there, again, it's very slow and gradual, right? The way that children get manipulated into doing these things. So my advice is a little bit more direct and blunt. I actually am not a fan of the one-on-one ways that we teach in our communities. I know we do it because we think it's higher quality education. That I take my son and give him one-on-one with a sheikh, or my daughter one-on-one with a sheikha, whatever it might be. It's much better if you put your kids in group settings, if you ask me. It's my preference, number one. It's the way that we typically do things traditionally. Or if it's one-on-one, it's in the presence of the parent, otherwise, online or otherwise. But any digital khalwa, right, or in-person khalwa is you not doing your due diligence as a parent. So again, you tell your kids, but then you also make sure that you are there in that space. Because again, you will pick up on things that the child will not pick up on, that are very, very subtle things. Right? Just off the top of my head, right? If the sheikh says, hey, isn't it hot, and starts to slowly venture into conversations that might make the kid say, okay, let me take off my jacket, these little things. A kid doesn't understand maybe this person is trying to groom me for something. But a parent will say, something is not right. Okay, this is one random comment. Okay, maybe. But then another one, okay, there's something wrong here. So please do not give your kids access to digital khalwa with anybody, anytime. It always must be a group setting, or you be in that space. That's my advice when it comes to that issue. The second question that I think I reread it, was more direct. If there is a child who has benefited from a particular sheikh involved in a scandal, what do you tell them? You do need to talk to them directly and go through exactly what we've mentioned here today, is that no one is infallible, and that somebody has been shown to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, that we do not associate with that person anymore. And you have to have a zero tolerance policy. It can't be, well, you know what, my son likes his lectures, it's okay. Now you're teaching your kid that we tolerate these things in our community. No, absolutely not. We will not listen to this person. We will not interact with this person's content. This is done. Like, we are done with this person in every way, shape, and form. And we should actually inform other people as well if it's a proven incident. Do not allow your child to use this person's resources. So very, very clearly, and this is the fine line between, I think what Sheikha said, which is super important, is that we don't run our tongues when it's simply like hearsay, or if it's things that are just kind of like, it's fun to talk about the rumor, but something that we have strong suspicion about. Then we tell people, again, you don't have to plaster it in public, but hey, did you know that maybe it's best that your kid not be in this gathering? And you don't say, you can't be shamed into telling somebody, hey, it's not proven in a court of law. You're not making this a legal case. You're just saying this person's character might be suspect. We recommend you don't spend time in this person's presence physically or virtually. So, Allahu A'lam.
Jazakumullah khair. Okay, similar, well, not really similar, but this is maybe in terms of taking it from the children maybe who were involved or benefiting from some of the resources online. If you're an adult maybe who was in a position at different points where you may have invited this person in to the community to give talks or to do different programs, how can you navigate? A person may feel guilty or may feel that they've actually endangered or could have put other children in danger because of this, such programming and so forth. So what would be a way to address that guilt or to sort of navigate those feelings?
So you invited somebody, you vetted them, you didn't know anything. ذَلِكَ مَبْلَغُهُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ. That's what I know at that point. I'm not going to suspect everybody. Right? Then later on happened, and you're going to say, you know what, at that point, we didn't know more than that. As simple as this. But if you know or there's a suspicion, exactly like Sheikh just said, absolutely you don't. You stop it completely. But at that point, you didn't know better than that. What can we do?
I'll piggyback a little bit on that. So yes, when we know better, the hope is that we do better. So if we didn't have access to that information at a certain point, then we did the best we could, and there was no but once we know, then we have a responsibility, and that's where our accountability comes in. And I would say that if a person is dealing with that level of guilt, maybe that is an opportunity also to maybe seek out therapy or someone who's trained to be able to sort of walk through, because there may be other layers involved. And so again, it would be hard to sort of address that at this level, but there are places and there's ways to get support to be able to navigate that. But the umbrella piece is if we didn't know, we can't change what we did not know at that time. Inshallah, that answers that one. Okay, and this one, we're going to take it now to the organization. So we had the children, the adults, now maybe the organization. So one of the concerns is that, yes, shaitan may be, shaitan is influences people, or this is kind of like how, like, shaitan may lead people to do such things. But they're stating here, it's the responsibility of the institution to protect the congregation. And so I know that Dr. Sheikha Haifat mentioned this in terms of demanding from organizations to put protocols in place. But the question here is, what organizational structures are implemented or have been implemented in the past 20 years? I think the 20 years part is yours.
I'll start with the same thing I mentioned earlier, is that there's a propensity not just of the individual to let their guard down when people of knowledge are the subject of conversation, but also institutions. So the board and the masjid and whatever it is will say, well, you know what, we don't need to be that strict against the sheikh or the sheikha because of who they are. And so that's the first problem, is that it is institutionally the same issue of a failure to apply those guidelines. But the hard answer to this is I don't think our institutions have done a lot, because the general culture we're a part of, and I have to speak about that. I was doing some research earlier about this, and the prevalence of infidelity in America is incredibly high, right? Of abuse is incredibly high, of all types. And we are a part of that fabric. We have to stop acting like I remember when I was growing up, people would say, well, that's what the Americans do. As if like somehow we don't live in America and we don't absorb some of those things. Actually, a lot of our, as the data person, I can speak to this, is like a lot of the trends in the community of American society, we follow very closely as Muslims. So we have to stop having this bifurcation that because we're Muslims, we don't have to deal with these systems in place. What I have found actually is quite the opposite, is that we used to have a system of incredibly strict rules and a pre-technology world where you could not access people in the way you can access them today. And really, this is something which has really just changed all interaction. I mean, if I had to contact an imam 20 years ago, you pick up the telephone and you call the masjid office and you leave a message, and maybe it's the administrative person gets it, passes it on to the sheikh will get back to you, and there was no direct access. We need to be careful about the ways in which direct access has made ease of communication and the desire for instant answers. So I remember, just as the imam of the masjid years ago myself, same thing happens. You call the masjid, you leave a message, right, for the sheikh. Or you send an email and the sheikh or the admin will get back at the right time. But what happens today? I made a call, he didn't answer. I sent an email, I waited 30 minutes. And then you get the direct phone call from somebody. Well, I got your number from so-and-so, they said it'd be okay, and this happens. So just be very mindful. What institutions should do is set up protocols for this. In a professional space, I do not think that community members should directly message the person. If you do, let it go through some institutional communication. You have a Slack system, you have some other WhatsApp community, you have something that it goes out, it cannot be in the private sphere of that individual. And if you ever are asked to message the person in a private capacity, that's the time to say, you know what, there's something that's not right here. So the masajid have to start to do this and invest in the technologies and the systems that make it harder for this stuff to happen. Now, people will always try to curtail it, and that's where the individual taqwa and the spider sense has to go off. Your spidey sense, no, this is not right. Why am I being asked to not use the email? And I know, Dina, you can speak to this quite a bit, is that what happens in counseling, there was actually a study that was written, I found, had to do with pastor infidelity versus therapist infidelity. And they found that about 10% of therapists would fall into infidelity with their clients, but about 30% of the pastors in the study. Now, what's the difference? What they find is that when you are not trained in a system that tells you how to deal and disengage in certain ways, that you actually don't know what to do. What do you do when perhaps there is feelings that develop, either one way or the other? Do you take notes? If you're a therapist, you have to take copious notes about everything and paper trails and all kinds of mechanisms. There's a code of law. You cannot be in a relationship with someone for 2 years until after you stopped counseling them. But in our cases, that doesn't exist in the masajid. So we do need codes of conduct. We do need, and these are not about halal and haram guidelines, actually, because it might be halal for the person to marry this person. But is it the ethical thing to happen in this circumstance, right? What type of power structures might make this problematic? So there's a lot of work to do, and if we have to just be honest, we're far from the solution. And it's unfortunate that we needed incidents like this to kind of put us into overdrive and to quickly kind of figure out where we've gone wrong in 20 years. But alhamdulillah, inshallah, tomorrow will be better than it was yesterday and 20 years previously. May Allah help us all.
I think the other thing to remember is responsibility is according to the ability. And one of the things when these incidents happen, naturally we do look towards our institutions, and we should. But we have to remember that there are many things that occur outside of the purview of institutions. And so we as a Muslim community have to be careful where we need to put more standards on these communities, but this is why as well we should do activities that are centralized within our community and not with lone freelancers and lone rangers. What do I mean by that? I mean, if the individual, the person who commits the scandal, if there's no authority structure, there's no group of scholars that they return back to, they're just a lone ranger on their own, it's very hard to hold that person to account from a community perspective. That's only a legal perspective after that. But this is why in masajid, when we take these structures, it's because we can vet the people that we bring in. Do you see what I'm saying? So sometimes incidents that happen, we tend to say, well, why didn't the institution stop this? And it's like, maybe this was done away from the institution. Maybe this person wasn't even, doing what they were doing through the auspices of that institution. So we have to be careful that we don't knock our masajid more than they deserve. Like, they deserve a wake-up call. I think all institutions deserve a wake-up call. But also look at the limitations as well, as to how much can they actually do if someone wants to go do wrong. There's a limited amount to where you can stop that, right? That's why in all companies, sports, these things happen, and there's no way they can stop some of these things, right? So we try our best and we put the standards up in any case. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, so this is a lighter question, right? Alhamdulillah. So the question is, again, I don't know from whom, how can we make sure to become true people of the Quran and not among those that the Quran does not go past their throats? Ya Rabbi Ameen. Number one is review your niyyah, your intention, why you are studying the Quran, tajweed, memorizing, teaching. The niyyah is number one. Number two is al-ihsan, where the famous hadith of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, "A'budullah ka'annaka tarah, fa lam takun tarah fa innahu yarak." Worship Allah as if you are seeing Him, and if you don't see Him, He's seeing you. Quran, again, anything related to Quran is an act of worship. So when I am reading the Quran, memorizing, teaching, tajweed, tadabbur, all these are acts of worship. I need to keep reminding myself that I am in a state of worship. Allah is, and this is individual, by the way. The teachers may remind you, but you have to keep reminding yourself also. And number three, which is especially for the teachers here, anybody who teaches anything related to Islam, is the verse that scares me to death. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. Believers, why do you say things and you don't do it? And you don't apply it? And Allah responds and says, كبر مقتا عند الله. One of the most hated things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you say what that you don't do. So when I read خذ العفو وأمر بالعرف وأعرض عن المشركين, when Allah said in the verse, take pardon and do what is accepted and stay away from the disbelievers. I can't be upset and I'm reading the Quran or I'm memorizing, let alone I'm teaching. And then someone upsets me and then I say, I will never talk to them again. Then it did not move beyond my throat. That's why Sayyidina Umar, he used to say it took us 8 years to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah. Every verse we read, we learn, we know, we memorize, and we practice, then we move to the next one. May Allah make us among those. Ya Rabbi Ameen.
Okay, so a question came with how do we deal with the fact that people might not believe us if we come out to share our experiences? And I think this is a very, very, very common question and a valid concern. I think just historically, a lot of times, like for people, and I'm chiming in a little bit, just as a therapist maybe who's encountered or studied bits and pieces of this and encountered it a lot in the community as well. People in general, like especially within more traditional conservative spaces, including our religious community, but also our cultural values, it's hard for people to sometimes reconcile, right? Like some people may be experiencing denial. Like I know there's all this stuff that's coming out, but how do we reconcile someone who, you know, might, I'll throw the example earlier, even in terms of family members. We know that incest happens, that there are inappropriate relationships that sometimes take place within a family, right? So haram is one thing, and then reality is another in terms of like what we experience. So when children sometimes come forth or they share certain experiences, sometimes, you know, parents don't want to address it or don't want to deal with it or will make them feel, you know, like it's not the case. They may be, you know, they must be mistaken somewhere of not wanting to deal with the repercussion of calling someone out for inappropriate behavior and crossing lines. And so how do we deal with somebody who, you know, if we're adults even coming and sharing some of this experience, people don't know how to deal with such difficult information. And so if you're going to the wrong, well, I guess a person who may not be trained, like sometimes we're going to the people that we want to believe us because we just want to share it with them, but they may not be the appropriate person in that sense to be able to listen and almost have a responsibility of acting on what they're hearing. And so, or know, you know, how to navigate the discussion. So if it's a person who's personally experienced something and coming through, maybe going to my friend, she may dismiss it, but if I go to, you know, a proper channel, so whether it's like a trained counselor, a trained professional, even in, you know, in cases of going to a, if it's something that happened within the community, going to the appropriate administration, if it's the religious director, or, you know, going with someone, coming out with this experience, we have a responsibility as a community to make sure that we are not dismissing what's happening, right? So that we maybe ask, if we don't know what to say, then we can guide them to the proper channel. And for us, a person who maybe have experienced it ourselves, to, first off, I'm sorry if anybody has that, if anybody goes through that, because it is really, really hard to not be validated at such a basic level. So I should have started with that part of acknowledging and validating the feeling. And the more events we have like this, where we bring it to light and we shed light on the conversation, the hope is that we'll be able to empower the community to be able to support and at least know the direction of how we can guide people into getting the proper supports, and then have the system itself take on the responsibility of making sure that we don't have the wrong people or people who are causing harm in positions of influence within our masajid.
I just want to add something, which is I think part of the reason why there's often people are dismissive of these claims is because they don't want to believe them. Because if they continuously are ignored, then it seems like it's a far-off phenomena. And so for me, the biggest issue here is we just have to be upfront and honest and say there's a lot of cowardice in our communities around this issue, because it's a fear of, well, what do I do with this? Now I got to go and confront, you know, the individual, right, the institution, whatever it may be. But I just have to come back with how many more cases do we need until we begin to believe this is a real phenomenon? It's like a slap in the face to us. And then I worry that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, like if we do not respond to, you know, the cases that keep coming out, He's sending a signal, essentially, that do something about what's happening in your communities, and you're ignoring it. It's a sign of cowardice. And it's also, may Allah protect us, perhaps a reason why these things will keep on occurring. So, especially for the men in the room, but I think everybody involved, like you can't be a coward about these things. You know, subhanAllah, it's a fascinating part of prison culture people don't know about, but even prisoners who commit the most heinous crimes of murder and other things, if they hear about a prisoner being put in who did child abuse, they take that person out. Because even they know there's a limit to what can be done. And they're like, I don't care about the court of law, I don't care about all these other types of things. Like, someone has been accused of this, we're going to handle this person. There is a level of vigilante justice. Now, I'm not here to defend that, but I'm here to say, look, people take these things seriously. Like, be someone who takes these things incredibly seriously. Like, we all have children. Like, think about your own kid. Imagine your own kid said something and everyone doesn't believe your own child, right? But like, really, like, we need to wake up and say, I got to be man enough, especially if you're a male figure in the community, right, or woman enough to say, you know what, like, I'm willing to have the uncomfortable conversation because of how serious this allegation is, right? It's not about protecting my discomfort and risk aversion in that moment in time. And if you can't, you better figure out how to get someone else to do it. Hey, you know what, I don't know how to deal with this. Hey, you know what, Sheikh, like, you need to take care of this for me. But at least pass the information along, say that it is credible, investigate it properly. This is the only way we protect our kids. There's really no other way. Right? I'm sorry to say it in such a harsh term, but.
So just to circle back to the beginning of the question, which is when the victim feels no one's listening to them, sometimes you may think that you don't want to speak about it because initially people are ashamed, or they feel like they're saying something bad and wrong, and they don't want to be the source of bringing something up that's bad. We have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. That Allah does not like for there to be outspokenness about evil except when a person has been oppressed or wronged. So in that case, and then Allah ends that ayah saying, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ سَمِيعًا عَلِيمًا. And Allah has always been hearing everything and knowing everything. So that person, something happened to them and someone didn't listen to them, Allah is hearing every plea that you're making. Allah hears you. Allah knows exactly what happened. So do not feel that if one door was shut, that every door will be shut. No, you have complete permission and right to continuously go and speak, and people will hear you. But don't be dismayed just because one door closed, someone didn't take your complaint seriously. No. And this is what we are trying to show here on the panel as a community, that when complaints come, inshallah, we will take them seriously. We are saying this out loud so that if anybody comes to any of us here, they should know this person will not ignore me. This person will not disbelieve me. This person will not brush me aside. And actually, that's the one big function of us being able to be here, which is to let people know, come forward if there are things that you've been holding inside or that you're going through. I just want to add that.
No, we'll do one. Okay, so this one, hold on, I'm like attempting it sideways. Okay, so after hearing about the incident, so many brothers started blaming the mom or asking maybe more details of how old the child was. So what advice do you have for the men specifically?
Actually, not for the men only, but for the community. What is these questions will do? If she was 11 or she was 13, is that going to change? Still a child, right? And how can the mother do that? We don't know. And there's a principle in Islam, so it's a tawaqquf. You need to stop, because if my question is not going to help me, get me closer to Allah, or help me solve the problem, why we are asking? من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. A sign of a good Muslim, stay away from things that does not concern you. These are details. That's why from the beginning we said we're not addressing a case, we're addressing a phenomena. And I'm just going to add, because that's came up repeatedly, should we not let women come to the masjid? Should we put all these strict? Well, this didn't happen in the masjid. This was online. So basically, and I'm going to put a very high goal, but the main way of preventing this is taqwa of Allah, is when we really have this conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everyone, man or a woman, both. When I come to the masjid and I see a person not dressed properly, what does Allah want from me? Lower your gaze. I need to practice this taqwa that Allah told me in every level. And this is something we need to teach all our community. And it will take time, but again, every question we ask, I have to ask, is that the question Allah wants me? That's taqwa. Is that going to make the problem easier? That's taqwa. And may Allah make it easy.
Jazakallah khair. Do you want to add anything? We're good? Okay. So with that, inshallah, we'll transition into Aisha prayer. And the scholars will be available after Aisha if you have any. I know there's a few questions we were not able to get to, but if you have specific questions, they will be available after Isha, inshallah, to answer. I think also it's safe to say that this won't be the last time that we meet and facilitate such conversations, and maybe even if we have smaller circles or types of just groups to be able to see how we can improve recommendations for our leadership, even in terms of protocol, as long as we're going in a proactive arena. If there is a need for there to be more of a support circle with maybe like therapists, and if that's a need as well in the community, we will inshallah find a way to facilitate that as well. We want to say Jazakumullah khair for your attention and for your concern and commitment to making a change in the community and for learning and benefiting. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from everyone and to guide us and keep us on the straight path and to be beacons of light and enforcing justice within our capacity. And if that's speaking up whenever something is wrong, then we have that courage to be able to do so, and to do so in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
الله أكبر الله